Imagine being able to write over 80 books and I think roughly 3.5 million words within those 80 books. Can you imagine that? How crazy would that be? Well, it's not out of the realm of possibilities. In fact, there is one guy that is doing this, man, like a champ, and his name is Michael La Ronn. Now, Michael's been a guest on my main channel a couple of times. You've heard me just gush about this guy, but I really wanted to sit down with him and talk a little bit more about the craft of writing and how is it that he's become so prolific and still maintains such a good high quality to it. And I didn't want to think that he was simply just an outlier, that he was just one of few people that could do this. There had to be some type of a blueprint and a way to understand his methodology and how he's able to become so prolific. So without any further ado, let's get into the interview. Tell me the origin of beast mode for Michael La Ronn, because dude, when you go into beast mode, I'm scared. Like I call in the kids. I'm like, come on in. By the way, I don't have any kids, so that might be a problem. I shutter up the windows and such like that. Beast mode. Fill me in on this.
Well, it's a product of the 2020 pandemic. So 2020 was happening, and I found myself in a very weird emotional state, in a weird transition, just in terms of, mourning the life that we left and figuring out what the hell we were going to go into next. And I found myself not writing for a while, and I found myself wanting to do something to keep myself productive. And so I came up with an idea of how can I stay motivated during these times. I mean, I think all of us can relate. 2020 was one heck of a year, and I don't think anybody could have predicted how that cookie was going to crumble. And I think there was a lot of uncertainty and just a lot of anxiety around that time. And so I wanted to do what I could to manage that. And so I came up with this idea of, all right, well, it's June. I really haven't written that much this year. How can I make up for it? So I sat down with the idea of I'm going to sit down and write as many books as humanly possible in 90 days. And Beast Mode was born, hats off to Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah. How many books was that in that 90-day period?
The first Beast Mode in 2020, I think, was 10 books in 90 days. So some of the books were on the shorter side. I mean, some of the books were pretty short, but I wrote, for the first year, I think I wrote all nonfiction books for writers. So That was the only thing I was in the mindset to write at that point. But some of the books were a little bit longer.
Okay. Now, when you say shorter and longer, can you give me like a number wise? What does that look like for you? Because some people might be like, short's like 50,000 words.
Yeah. I mean, when you're talking about nonfiction for writers, I mean, I think you kind of top out at 50,000 words. I mean, It's kind of rare to see something longer than that. Mm-hmm. But I had some books, I think, that were in that 50,000 range. And then I had others that were like 10, 12, maybe 15. So I said everything I needed to say, and then I just ended it. So
yeah. And when you go into something longer, what does that look like? Is that something closer to like novel length?
Yeah, it's usually, my novels are anywhere between 50 and 70,000 words these days. For my nonfiction, like I said, it's usually my sweet spot is between 30 and 50. Okay. Usually if I'm going longer than that, I like to break it up.
What's a day? What's a good day for you as far as word count?
Yeah, I set a kind of a target. Usually, I like to try to hit at least 2,000 words a day. Okay. And 2,000 words a day is just based on, all right, where do I want to be in 10 years? All right, so if I write 2,000 words a day, for 7 days, and then you multiply that out by a year, and then you multiply that out by 10 years, that gets you into really prolific territory. And so some people would say 2,000 words a day really isn't that much. And there's a lot of days where, frankly, Dale, I don't do 2,000 words a day. I might do 1,000. But then there's days where I might do like 10,000. I had several days during Beast Mode where I was well over 10,000 words.
Those were the days like you would share some of the stuff on your YouTube community tab, and I'm just going, what? 10,000. As soon as I'm done with 10,000, I typically collapse. It's like a marathon to me. I feel like exhausted creatively and, physically.
Well, that's the fun thing about that is
Yeah.
on those days you got a lot of adrenaline going. So for me, when I hit 10, I'm thinking, oh crap, how can I hit 11? Can I hit 12?
Oh my
Can I hit
gosh.
13?
You get hungry. It's like you're chasing
yeah.
the dragon here, Michael. It's dangerous territory.
Indeed. But I'm all about the danger, so it's all good.
That's awesome. You've always preached so much about becoming prolific as an author. In fact, so much so this is something that has always inspired me. Some people look at my catalog and I'm like, I don't even scratch the surface of what this guy can be able to do. Naturally, you walk the walk and you talk the talk when it comes to the whole being prolific. So what are some systems you put in place to publish at such a high frequency while maintaining great quality? Because your writing is stellar. It's not like I've ever read any of your stuff and going, well, there's problems with the syntax in here and I see a typo. No, it's really clean, great quality work.
Yeah, well, one of the things that is a key focus for me and has been for several years is automation and how one can create a writing business that seemingly runs itself. So using tools and technology and data. So one of the things that I've focused on over the last probably 18 months or so is how I can create cleaner manuscripts before they go to my editor. So I've actually created this workflow, and it's driven a lot by automation, where I can take a manuscript that I have just finished, and well, let me step back. First things first, write the story. I write the story right the first time. So I don't outline. I don't spend a whole lot of time in self-revision. I edit as I go. And so when I write the end, it's the end. And you'd be amazed how much time that saves you just in and of itself. But then when I have created a manuscript that is ready for my editor, I actually have a process and I run it through that process. I wrote a book. It's called Advanced Author Editing, if anyone's interested in that process. I run it through this process, and there's a lot of tools and technology that is available to us today, often for free, to help me catch edits that my editor has made in the past. So if my editor has said, hey, Michael, you did this wrong, fix this, I actually captured all of those edits. I went back through all of my last 10 years of manuscripts, and I figured out which of those edits can be turned into if-then statements. And then I was able to use Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word macros to help me capture as many of those as possible. So when I finish a manuscript, I run it through this process, and it captures a lot of things that my editor would have already said that were wrong. And so that way, when I send it to my editor, she's only focusing on things that are unique. And so that process helped me cut my edits in half that my editor typically made. So that's one way. That's one system that I've used. And that's using tools and technology that's already on my computer and that I was already using anyway. So through data and technology, and then looking at the edits that my editor made, looking for trends in the data in terms of, all right, what chapters do I tend to make the most mistakes? What do those chapters have in common? What are some predictors of things as I'm writing a chapter that I need to pay attention to? I found, in kind of some quirks in my data that chapters where I introduce a major character, for some reason or another, tend to have the most errors. So those are the chapters that I spend the most time on and that I direct my editor to spend the most time on, and that helps also improve the quality of the manuscript. So without going too deeper into it, there are lots of tools and technology available today to help you do that, and I'm just a big fan of automation.
Awesome. I will make sure to leave a link to your resource that you had mentioned before inside the show notes of this podcast.
Yes, and the link to that is authorlevelup.com/advanced author editing.
Nice. Thank you so much. All right. We briefly touched on your YouTube channel. The subscribers of your YouTube channel, Author Level Up, which, by the way, if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Subscribe to it. You get daily updates from your community tab. It's amazing. It's essentially like a blog of sorts. You're able to go in and see where your mindset, what you're doing throughout the day. Part of that journey, you shared something I found so interesting. It's how you use voice dictation to produce fiction work. Now, I just pivoted over to fiction this year. It's been an absolute amazing time for me. But
nice.
Then I see you over here, and I know I shouldn't be comparing, but I'm like going, how is he voice dictating this creative work that I can only put through my fingertips? So how's that process work for you when you're voice dictating some fiction work?
Yeah, it like anything else, it is a muscle. There are some people that have the muscle, some people that don't. If you do, then don't expect to sit down and dictate elegant prose on day one. Yeah. A lot of people, they think when they see dictation, they think that they're going to sit down in front of their computer and the words are going to flow out and birds and rainbows are going to sprout all over the place. And the next thing you know, at the end of 10 minutes, you got 5,000 words and you can go on about your day. It doesn't work that way. No. In fact, if you actually listen to people dictate, it's anything but elegant. It's actually very choppy. It's rough. People take a lot of time between sentences. They don't always speak the proper sentences in terms of grammar when it comes out. And so if you understand that, then it gets a lot easier. And then when you learn to speak and you learn to start to say things like, Dale said, comma, open quote, Michael, comma, I love being on your show, exclamation point, close quote, new line. Michael smiled and said, comma, open quote, thanks, comma, buddy, period, close quote. It's like riding a bike. You can just slip into it, slip out of it, and it's fine, you know? But I can't tell you how long it took me to get to that point, though, Dale. Yeah. So I remember days, weeks. I remember I used to use Dragon for Mac, and it sucked. I didn't realize how much it sucked at the point. But Dragon for Mac was awful. Thank God it's been discontinued. It would just be super inaccurate. So I remember I forced myself. I put my hands on my thighs, and I forced myself to dictate one of my chapters that I'd already written perfectly without making any mistakes, without touching the keyboard. I had to do everything by voice, and I forced myself to do that for like 2 weeks. And eventually I got over that hump. So I just, a lot of people, they say, I can't do that. That's just not for me. Yeah. And I try to encourage people to say, what you think, you probably don't think it's for you because you have the wrong expectations. The point is, a lot of people say, well, my voice is going to sound terrible. I hate the way I sound. I don't like the way I sound either, but I'm good with dictating 3,000-4,000 words an hour. I don't care what I sound like if the words that are coming out ultimately are good. But the key is to take your time, know that it's a learning curve. And I actually wrote another book. It's called How to Dictate a Book. And that book, it's available at authorlevelup.com/dictation book. I actually have a video course in that book where I actually dictate parts of that book. I was making it up as I went along. I dictated parts of that book. Yeah. And people can see in real time what dictation actually looks like. Yeah. And I think that's kind of critical. But to your earlier point of what does it look like, what is the transition, 90% of it is mental. Okay. If you get past the mental part of it, then it's just figuring out, okay, how am I going to do this? What method works for me? And how do I learn and sit down and do it?
Got you. What's one way that you keep yourself dialed in without running completely off the rails? Because I know that you're a good mutual friend of ours, Joanna Penn, taught me a new phrase, a discovery writer, not a pantser.
Yeah.
So how do you keep yourself on track and not having to go back and edit a lot of stuff because you misspoke at some point?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I do, it's kind of it's silly, but it's so silly that it works. Mm-hmm. So there's two parts to your question. The first part is the technical part, which is how do you avoid misspeaking as much as possible? Yeah. One of the things that I do is it's a method I came up with. It's called the Pikachu method. So as I'm talking, I'll be dictating. So I'll say, Dale said, comma, open quote, Michael, comma, it's great to have you on my, oops, you made a mistake. You wanted to say the show and not my show. What you do is when you make a mistake, you say, great to have you on my Pikachu, period. Dale said, comma, it's great to have you on the show, blah, blah, blah. You say what you want to say, and then you say it correctly. So then what you do is when you're editing, you just do a find all for Pikachu, period, and then delete. And you can write Microsoft Word macros that can do that in the click of a button. So the technical part of that is if you start making mistakes, there's tools that can help you with that. Yeah. Now, as far as the story goes, I think what you're asking is how do you avoid going down rabbit holes that that lead you nowhere, right? Because there's dictation and then there's discovery writing. They're two separate things, right? But I happen to mix them together. So I dictate while I'm discovery writing, or pantsing, as I like to call it. Yeah. And that is really it's kind of a tour de force of just mental strength, because you in one respect, on one hand, you have to just trust that you're telling the story that you need to tell, and you just kind of have to trust where you're going. So it's like being, it's kind of like it's like when you're in a car and you're in the passenger seat of the car, and the person driving doesn't drive the way you want them to drive. So you're looking for the brake on the other hand here, but they get you to where you need to go, but they just maybe didn't do it the way you thought it was going to go. It's kind of like that, and you just kind of have to trust the process. I mean, Joanna says all the time, trust emergence, trust the process, and that takes an extreme amount of mental strength and fortitude that I think I didn't appreciate when I first started doing it, because I didn't realize how hard that is. Now, as far as making sure that you're not going down rabbit holes and doing those other things, you just have to trust. You just have to trust. And at the end of the day, I'm a big fan of just making sure that, I tell the story that keeps me excited. My emotional compass is, am I excited about this? When I log off of my computer for the night, do I feel legitimately excited and enthused about what I wrote? Yeah. And if the answer to that is yes, then my compass is going in the right direction. If the answer to that is no, then I need to think about that. Well, maybe where did I go off the road? Writing, it's in many respects, it's an atlas of your emotions, and you almost, so much of it is learning how to see without your eyes, learning how to see with your spirit. And so, yeah, long answer to your question, but hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, it really was. I'm curious, and I'm sure you probably have the same system, but I wonder, how does it compare when you're editing voice dictated content versus the old fashioned way of typing?
It depends. It depends. It depends on how you dictate. There's many different ways to dictate, by the way. A lot of people think of Dragon, so you're sitting in front of a microphone, looking at your screen, and you speak, and then the words appear on your screen. Yeah. There's also transcription. So I was doing dishes the other day, and I just was doing dishes, and I was speaking my story into the voice memo app on my phone, and then I upload that into Dragon, and then it turns it into text. So some methods are cleaner than others. So I would say the biggest difference is that whatever you say, as long as the dictation app hears you correctly, whatever you say gets committed to the page. So if you speak grammatically incorrect, which I am wont to do, I often say things that are just, I use the word less than instead of fewer. I say things that aren't grammatically correct. The app is going to hear that, and it's going to commit those words to the page. That is one of the big things that you have to be careful with dictation, is that sometimes it is so accurate that you have that problem. Whereas with your fingers, you tend to have less of that. But what I find with my fingers is that what I will often miss, I'll think that I typed an article, like the or a or an, but I just missed it. And so when I'm glancing over that, my eyes tend to glaze over those a lot more when I'm writing, traditionally.
Interesting. I love hearing these different perspectives, and you're so fascinating. I love chatting with you, and it's crazy. We've blasted through our time together, but I want to wrap up today's podcast with something I ask each one of our guests. It's, what's one piece of advice you can share with aspiring authors and self-publishers?
That small goals and small progress every day adds up in a massive way. So one of the things that I always ask myself at the beginning of every day is, what does the picture of good look like today? And it could be something small. I mean, it could be writing 2,000 words or 500 words or answering an important email or fixing something on my website, whatever that is. If you can net just one small victory every day, no matter how small it is, you'd be shocked at where you end up in a decade. What a lot of people forget to do, or they don't do, or they underestimate, is the power of the small victory every day. And a lot of people just throw up their hands and say, well, if I can only do one little thing every day, I'm not going to do anything. But the people that are successful are the ones that They get those small victories every day. And then 10 years from now, they have 80 books and they're a lot more successful. So every journey begins with a small step, to use the cliche.
Big shout out and thanks to Michael for taking some time out his day to spend some time with us, folks. Make sure that you go over and visit his website at michaellaronn.com. And of course, go subscribe to him on YouTube at Author Level Up. The dude is just awesome, fantastic. And also you can see him doing some guest appearances as well over with the Alliance of Independent Authors, another great YouTube channel. In the meantime, folks, if you're enjoying this content, make sure, of course, you hit that thumbs up, share it with somebody who might like it too, and I'll see you next week with another interview.